Welcome everyone. Today's webinar is on implementing Lite patient navigator programs for overactive bladder patients. I would like to thank OAB for making this webinar possible today. Today we're going to talk about how practices large and small can implement a Lite navigator program, which we're defining as a navigator program that does not need to hire additional or dedicated resources or invest in capital to make this happen for their patients. So with that being said, I thought we should talk about a couple housekeeping and items before we get started. So the question is always, do I have to take notes or will I get the handouts? So everyone will be getting a copy of today's deck along with the handouts that the speakers will be presenting today. So in today's webinar, you're going to see over 20 tools that can help you in your enterprise to get started with a Lite Navigator program. And these tools that you see screenshots of, many of which are too small to actually see on screen, that you'll be getting in a PDF format that you can utilize in your own practice. Additionally, we wanted to let you know that you're welcome to ask questions, and the way we need to do this with so many people on the webinar is to ask you to use your chat bar. So this is an example of what your chat bar looks like for most people. It would be on your right-hand side of your screen. So you can see this is where you can ask questions. And then while our faculty are presenting today, rest assured that I'll be curating your questions, and I'll be taking the ones that we have the most time for at the end, and we'll ask our speakers to address them. We'll also be sharing with you our contact information at the end, so if you decide you'd like to engage with us offline, we invite you to do so. So with that being said, I'd love to introduce our faculty to you. We're very lucky today to have with us Beth Rutledge. And Beth, as you know, you might have seen on one of our previous webinars, is an expert in the area of overactive bladder. And she is a consultant working with both enterprises in urology and urogynecology, but also with industry and device and diagnostic companies alike. Before her consultancy, Beth was the Chief Nursing Officer at Urology Associates in Nashville. And you'll see that she has a real passion for patient education and nurse navigation. So Beth, thank you for joining us today. Also on our faculty is Betty Hall, and Betty serves as OAB's Clinical Applications Manager. So she's actively helping practices and enterprises across the United States every day achieve their overactive bladder goals. Before this, she was the Director of Bladder Diagnostics at Chesapeake Urology, where she was also the Overactive Bladder Navigator for 3 states. And before that, she was a urodynamicist. So you'll see that in today's presentation, where that's really the heart of where Betty's clinical passion lies and how important that tool is in helping us to guide our overactive bladder patients. So we're very lucky to have her here today. And as you see, like Beth, she's got a great passion for driving patient outcomes through education and clinical engagement. So thank you, ladies, for joining us today. Quickly about me, I also work for OAB. I serve as the portfolio manager for the overactive bladder products, and today I'll also be your moderator. So what we'll cover today is defining a Lite Navigator program, which is a scaled down version of the full Navigator programs that no doubt that everyone is familiar with. So we're going to be talking about how you can do this with the staff that you have without need to hire additional staff, and how instead we can divvy up the workload across your staff members. We're also going to be talking about what you need to have in place to get this started. And then most importantly, we'll be making recommendations for you on what activities can be handled by which of your current staff functions, and showing you tools and tips along the way based on what Betty and Beth learned when they were doing Lite Navigator programs themselves. So it'll be really very practical oriented. And along the way, we'll give you lots of tips and algorithms, and then we'll close with Q&A. So with that being said, I think it would be really helpful for us to get a snapshot of where you guys are at, and it will help us as speakers to know what functions in your enterprise that you serve. So we have a quick poll or a questionnaire to ask of you, and we're going to ask you to vote. So you can do so with your mouse. When the poll comes up on your screen, you can click the role that most closely identifies you. And I'll give you a moment to read through the list and click the one that you think most closely identifies you. And then my colleague Carol will tell us what the top 2 roles are today. So Carol, do we have some results?
Yes, we do. So as you can see, the top two results are nurse at 71% and other at 29%.
Excellent. Well, thank you for that, Carol. This will help us tailor a lot of today's content to nurses and to the other functions that work in the practice. So we thank you for your engagement. But now next, what I'd like to do is I'd like to remind us why we're all here today. And to do that, I'd like to ask my colleague Beth if she could introduce to us of the video that we'll next see. It's a 90-second video, and I'd like Beth to tee up and give us some good thoughts as we head into watching this video together. So Beth, take it away.
Thank you, Debbie, and thank you, Library, for this opportunity. I also wanted to thank you all for joining our webinar and our mission, which is to help so many OAB folks out there. And we know how many that we have that are suffering from this. I'd like to start off, like Deb said, by sharing this beautiful video with you. It was created and produced by Library. As you watch this video, please put yourself in the shoes of an OAB patient and imagine. With that being said, let's watch this short video, please. Wow, I have to pause for a second because the content from this 1.5-minute video. So our goal within the next hour, we're going to help you capture missed opportunities to serve your underserved OAB patients. You're not going to have to add any FTEs or any capital expenses. So what we want to take from this video is that we see this patient from the I only imagine a better quality of life to the I have hope for a better quality of life, to the I believe and have a better quality of life. I imagine no more. Deb, I'll send it back to you.
Thank you for those words, Beth. I really appreciate you reminding ourselves that we're all here for patient outcomes. So next, what I'd really like to do is delve into, with Beth, why is it that we have such a huge number of overactive bladder patients, and yet so many patients are advancing through to second and third line therapies? And I'm wondering if that's something that, Beth, you might want to explain for us.
Absolutely. It's a great question, Deb. And I'm not going to get into just a huge explanation, but I wanted to tell you all there's many reasons for this. In our practice, we looked into this back in 2014, and you guys, we had about 11,000 OAB patients a year. Over 50% of them never came back for a second visit. And we only sent about 3.3% of the ones that we did have in our practice, only those people went on to advanced practice. So we had a huge problem, and we had to dig a lot deeper into the issue so that we could figure out what to do, how we could better care for these patients. So what we determined is that, we have a specialty, and there are specialties within the specialty. So we would have patients that would come to see us, and maybe they see a urologist, say for instance, that may be a specialist in prostate cancer, and OAB is not their passion. That doesn't mean that they're, mistreating a patient. That just means OAB is not their passion. But, as clinicians, we like to hang on to our patients. But what we had to try to reiterate and to get this across to all of our clinicians was that our patients belong to the practice, not the individual. So this was a principle that we had to adopt. And, if the provider is not passionate about OAB within the practice, they can grow a passion, or they can refer that patient to someone in the practice that has that passion in that technology already. So obviously the aha moment for us in our practice was that we have so many of these patients. The light bulb moment, it's basically, we're all people, we're all patients. We have the technology, we have the science. It's an information problem. Patients are not getting the information that they need to know what's going on and what we have, the whole entire treatment plan that we have for them to get better. Debbie.
Wow, I really appreciate your sharing that with us, Beth. So now what I'd really like to turn our attention to is let's get on the same page with what a Lite Navigator program is, and then we'll talk next about how to make it happen.
Well, Deb, the short answer is this is going to be an overview. Okay, so it's a Lite Navigator program is one that as patients enter an OAB treatment plan, you're utilizing your current staff. We're not hiring a team of navigators and new FTEs to sit in the room isolated all by themselves to pick up the phone and call 11,000 patients, if you will. So current staff becoming engaged in your mission and to play their specific navigating role is vital for this to be a success. And this slide, I call it the bubble slide, it just illustrates your practice, you and your patients, you are in the center of the bubble, and your team surrounds your bubble. So this is your mission and your team and your navigator, and everybody becoming engaged as a navigator can make this work. And Deb, again, I know this sounds simple. It can be overwhelming. I think the hardest part of this is basically pulling off the Band-Aid and getting started.
Well, thank you for that. Well, with that great segue, let's talk next about what the different roles of the staff are in the organization and how they can take on the navigator function. And I've been working with you a long time, Beth, so I know how your mind works. You're probably thinking we should talk first about the members of our organization that set the direction and strategy. So I'm guessing that you're going to want to talk about the decision makers.
Absolutely. So yes, it's got to start at the top. We have to have direction. We have to have leadership. So decision makers, whether you have a large practice with a board of 10 physicians, or if you have just a physician practice, or if you have C-suite people that are decision makers. The point is, decision makers are the ones at the top responsible for creating the pathway. At our practice, we had the OAB pathway that was basically AUA guidelines, plus we tweaked it somewhat. And our board said, this is the way we want all of our clinicians to view OAB and to offer this menu to every single one of these patients. No matter if you are a prostate cancer specialist or any other specialist in the field, every patient deserves to see the same menu and to have the same opportunity for a great outcome. So with that also being said, decision makers also have to hold the provider standards. They have to hold them accountable. And we're certainly not trying to suggest that decision makers are telling other physicians how to practice medicine, but these decision makers need to trend outcomes of all the clinicians, because again, our standard is a good opportunity, a good outcome for every patient. And we want to improve that patient's quality of life, and we want everybody to have that same opportunity. So they need to hold all the folks responsible and accountable for that. And with that being said, we go back to the slide that we've already spoken to. The patients belong to the practice, not the individual. So if that clinician is not a specialist in OAB, learn it or refer them on. So, and we have lots of tools for decision makers. We're happy to help with, we can customize that, but, everybody needs report cards. We get them our whole lives. So we don't expect just to have a piece of paper that tells us this is what you need to do. We need to be graded. We need to have report cards and financial reports. We need to know that this does work. Yeah.
Well, Beth, I wanted to thank you for going over that, and I also wanted to call out to our audience today. The screen grab in the lower right-hand corner of this slide is the first of some 20 tools that we'll be sharing with you today as handouts from this program, and this is a tracking program that you can use as a checklist to ensure that your executive team is looking at the right things in terms of holding the organization accountable. So next, if we're going down from the organization, from the top of the organization, down into the management side of the organization, Beth, I'm wondering if you can speak to what the manager's roles are in setting up a Lite patient navigator program.
Absolutely. And my hat is off to all of you managers. I know we've got several on this webinar, so I know you've worked very hard to get to where you are. But let me tell you, your role is critical for this to work, because I'm asking you to provide standards more than just goals, and expect your staff to abide by these standards. And with that being said, as I've traveled to some practices around the country, I can't tell you how many times I go in and the staff, we all need heartbeats, we all need people. But I've seen people movers. I've seen staff that they don't know what OAB is. I've seen staff that they don't know what urodynamics is or what a cystoscopy is. Let's educate our staff. And I'm talking from the front office to the back office. And I'm not saying everybody has to be knowledgeable down to cell level, but we need to know what we treat. Patients ask questions, and if we don't have answers, we lose trust. And we all know how long it takes to build trust and how quickly we lose it. So I encourage you, we've got to have a uniform training program that everybody understands what we do and everybody understands what our mission is. And with that being said, hold them accountable. Hold them accountable for their job, for their navigator role. You're going to have to share these results with your boss and decision makers, because you're responsible, you guys. And it is a big load, but one that is so rewarding. And when your patients are engaged in the same mission as you are, everybody is happy. And when they feel like they're a part of your goal, it just works better. So the tools that you're going to see coming up that you'll have at your fingertips is just a tool that I used, just a training checklist that I trained all of the staff, made sure all the staff was trained, and eventually, they were held responsible for that, even on their annual evaluations. Yeah.
So I think also Betty had a comment on manager training, so I'd like to invite her to join us.
Yes, I just quickly wanted to share something that our practice used that was very successful. We had each office schedule a lunch, like at the end of the month, for all the OAB pathway team players to get together and discuss their successes, their issues, their concerns, to enable us to keep the OAB program as a focus in our office. And that was very helpful to keep people and to keep our staff engaged in what we were doing.
Sounds like an excellent idea. So as we're going down, we've spoken about the executive team's role in the programs. Now we've talked about the manager's role in programs. And I'm wondering if we can switch to looking at this from a patient perspective. So let's imagine a patient in their first encounter with your urology or your urogynecology enterprise, and they're first walking into the front office. And I'm wondering if, Beth, you can speak to how we can even leverage the front office staff in terms of creating a Lite patient navigation experience.
I'd love to, Deb. You know, you guys, this is high-touch medicine. Navigating a patient through your practice, and again, whether you've got one physician or 50 physicians, it's high-touch medicine. You've got a lot of people touching this patient. So again, front office, that's the front line. Whether this is a new patient or a patient that has been to your practice 10 times, you have an opportunity to make a good impression. I know every time I go to the doctors, I've been there a lot, I size them up every single time because I want them to be what I expect them to be. So let's give our patients what they expect, what they deserve. So, and I know when the patient walks in the door, it's so important to get that insurance card and that, you know, the money, the copay. We have to do all of that. We have to keep the lights on in order to take care of these people, right? And there's so many rules and regulations that we have to keep up with. So very important, not downplaying that at all. But an intake form is something that we implemented in our practice because all of that I just mentioned is so very important. But the reason for visit, that seems so simple, but so many times it's so overlooked. So our front desk, we had the patient intake form, which you see on the left-hand side of your screen. Every single patient got this form every single time. And what I'm looking for is about 3/4 of the way down. And you'll see all the smiley faces. And that's the quality of life score. The patient scores themselves. So basically that patient is saying, if I had to live the rest of my life like I am right now, today, how do I feel about that? You know, if that patient scores themselves as a 4, 5, or 6, they are begging us to help them. And that's just like opening the door and saying, please, I need you. So, you know, let's give them something. How many times do these patients come to us? They've already had so many prescriptions and their physicians have sent them now to a specialist. And how many times have you heard of they're still getting another prescription? You know, we have so much more prescriptions, medications, such a great treatment if that works. But if it doesn't, you're the experts. You have so many more things to offer. And let's just make these patients understand that. And this was a tool that our front desk used to basically get that patient to say, hello, I'm here, help me now.
Well, Beth, I wanted to thank you for sharing these different tools. And for those of you who are thinking that you might need bifocals, it's not you, it's us. You can't put 3 forms on a slide and expect people to be able to read it. But what you can expect as a webinar participant is to get a copy of these 3 forms along with your 20-page handout on all the tools that you'll be seeing today. So rest assured, we'll be sending that to you after the webinar. So now, as you can only imagine, a patient coming into your office for a urology or urogynecology issue is going to probably have some meaningful encounters with your nursing team. And I know that many of our participants today are from the nursing function. So I'd like to next turn this webinar over to Beth, Betty, as she explains the nurse's role in patient navigation. So Betty, I'm wondering if you can take it away for us.
Sure, Deb. Nurses are the patient's advocate, and their most significant role is to obtain a thorough patient history and get details on current issues and be ready to discuss these with the physician. Collecting this information helps to expedite care for urgent needs, depending on the quality of life score, as Beth just showed you on that form. The nurse should be able to explain the OAB algorithm as it pertains to the patient's status on the pathway. And it's also helpful to have a standing order from the physician to enable the nurse to call in OAB prescriptions as needed. You'll see the suggested tools here are the OAB pathway, OAB symptom score, the voiding diary, and the patient pledge. As Deb has mentioned earlier, all these will be made available to you.
So here's an example of the OAB pathway. I'm wondering if Betty, maybe you could explain how you use this in your practice.
Sure. The algorithm is a map to bladder health, and this information should be reviewed with the patient step by step so that they can clearly understand how we together can follow this plan for a better outcome for them. These are important education materials that should be given to the patient during their first visit to take home and review. They're emptying. And also after that, schedule their next injection for Botox, whether it be 6 months out, 9 months out, that varies with different patients. The financial liaison should be able to discuss the patient's economic responsibility and make sure that they understand all out-of-pocket costs, and also be prepared to show a cost estimate for all the different third-line therapies.
So I also wanted to point out to you that we've got some tools for you, helpful reminder cards for patients, and in addition to the voiding diaries and the algorithms that you've already seen. But next, I'd like to ask our team to do a deeper dive on the call center and how you need to, as clinicians, work with them to bring them into the fold to help them understand and help to navigate the patient. So I'm wondering if, Betty, you can speak to how you did this.
Yes, it's especially important for the call center to be familiar with the algorithms of the pathway as well as the third-line therapies. They should be prepared to provide guidance when the patients call and not give them the runaround. Shown here are the algorithms for diagnostic studies and treatment. And these are excellent resources to have in front of the staff for a quick reference. So when the patients call, everything is right there for them to go down the algorithm and find out what their next steps are, where they've been.
Thank you for that. And these algorithms, too, will be available to you as part of your packet. I'm also wondering, I think that we had a comment from Beth about how she used to do this in her call center. So Beth, I'm wondering if you might want to share.
Yeah, real quickly, Deb, on the first algorithm on the left of your screen, and this is what we did at our practice. Again, it's not mandated, it's up to you and your decision makers. But at our practice, we tried to make our physicians, surgeons, if there's any surgeons here on the phone, we know you want to be in the OR. That's what you love, that's your passion. And so down at the very bottom of that algorithm, we allowed our urodynamicists, if they had a patient that they presented and they had fecal incontinence, they were allowed to go on and order that interscan, that PERT test. If they had a female patient with non-obstructive urinary retention and they did not have a swing, they were allowed to go on and order that interscan PERT test. So we're saving the patient time, the clinician time, everybody time, because this is something, it's a test. It's something that we can go on and order and start making this happen for that patient. And Betty will get into later a lot more detail with the urodynamicist, because that relationship between patient and urodynamicist is phenomenal. So thank you.
Well, thanks for adding that. Next, I'd like to ask Betty to speak to the scheduler tool and how she used to use this, not just as a nurse, but also with the schedulers.
Okay, this is the voiding diary, and it's an especially valuable tool used to enable us to understand the patient's daily habits. And sometimes this is difficult to get. Sometimes it's forgotten to be, it's not given to them at the office, or they took it home and now it's lost. But you shouldn't do urodynamics until you have a bladder diary, because what if that patient, the only thing wrong with them is they drink too much? And some people don't know that the more you drink, the more you have to go to the bathroom. So as I said, sometimes it's difficult to obtain this voiding diary and may require a few reminders.
So thank you for that. I think that's a great tip to engage the schedulers with this tool. So now, as you can only imagine, probably the slide you've been waiting for is Betty, as a former urodynamicist, is going to share with us how in her specialty she engaged this opportunity to work with patients from a navigation perspective. So I'd love to hear what you can recommend to us for your urodynamicists. Thanks, Betty.
Sure, Deb. So once a patient is on the UDS schedule, the urodynamicist should call the patient 3 or 4 days prior to testing, and during that call, confirm the time and the place of testing, share with the patient what to expect, and allow them to ask any questions at that point. This will facilitate a patient-clinician relationship and hopefully make them to feel less anxious about the procedure itself. Remind the patient at this point to bring that bladder diary. So if the patient hasn't started the diary, here you're calling them 3 to 4 days ahead of time. This will give them time. If they don't have a form, just have them fill it out on a piece of paper, their fluid intake, their output, what they drink, and then have them definitely bring that with them on the day of testing.
Good idea. So as some suggested tools here, we're showing an example of a patient education materials that is available from Laborie, and it's also part of your handout packet. But I'm wondering if Betty can speak to some other tools that she used as a urodynamicist.
Sure. The bladder health questionnaires are extremely helpful as a resource for the urodynamicist during the testing. This information can be a reminder, throughout the testing for the urodynamicist to ask the relevant questions about what that patient experiences on a daily basis. Patient education is the key to success for the OAB pathway. It's important for the patients to receive these materials to take home for review and research treatment that fits them.
I couldn't agree with you more. I also know that you've pulled together a standard operating procedure for us, and I'm wondering if you can speak to this SOP.
Sure. This is the protocol that was used by my practice, and it's extremely important to have standardization across the practice, especially when there are multiple sites performing urodynamics. Every location should be gathering the same pertinent information to facilitate easy interpretation.
I think that's a really good idea. I know also that you've pulled together some educational materials on third-line therapies themselves, and I wonder if you could speak to this brochure.
While performing urodynamics, this is a perfect time for the urodynamicist to review the bladder questionnaire and the bladder diary. The patients value that hour that they spend with the urodynamicist, and they often discuss other concerns that were not shared with the urologist on their first visit, such as fecal incontinence. I've had patients express to me many times how they appreciate and they're grateful for having that time to ask all of those questions and get a clarity on what's going on with them, and then when they leave, they have hope for what they're about to experience and get a better outcome.
I could see how in the course of such an exam that you really can take advantage of that relationship and opportunity to have a deep conversation with patients. And I'm understanding now why your role was combined at Chesapeake for both urodynamics and overactive bladder. It's making sense to me now as you're speaking through this. So next, what I'd like to do is ask you to speak to the billing office and how you've seen best practices in engaging the billing office to help in the patient navigation experience.
The billing office should provide all information in accordance to the protocol of that particular enterprise. They should also be ready to discuss timeframes for when the payments are due and have an itemized version of the bill to be able to provide clarity for the charges.
Makes sense. So you might think that we've covered all of the functions within the enterprise, as we outlined them in what Beth used to call the bubble slide at the beginning of this presentation. But I'd like to remind you that there actually is another role that we haven't covered. And so what I'd like to do now is ask Beth to explain to us the role of the patient in navigating their own healthcare experience.
Thank you, Debbie. Yes, let's not forget the patient. As we mentioned earlier, we're all people, and I venture to say we're all patients. I certainly know I am. And you know what? We're responsible for ourselves, and we have to do that. But it goes much deeper than that because, we are so busy trying to make ends meet, trying to get the kids everywhere, trying to get the house clean, dinner cooked, and ready for tomorrow. We have to be healthy. We have to be at a good place to be able to do all that. If we can't do that, we can't help anybody else. So it's okay to invest time in yourself. It's okay to invest money in your health. And that's a mindset that as patients, we have to realize we are responsible and we have to be okay with taking care of ourselves. With that being said, as a patient, I know I always choose a provider that I trust and that I expect to help me to do a better job of taking care of myself. I can't do it alone, but I have to help them and they help me. So the patient has a huge role in navigating their own better health. And with that being said, we did create this tool that I encourage you to really take a good look at, because again, we're doing a light navigation program. We don't have a team of 10 people sitting in a room calling 11,000 patients every year. So, but you know what? We get to see that patient every single day. We identify that that patient has OAB. That nurse has one-on-one FaceTime. That's high-touch medicine. When that patient comes in the room, get a red Sharpie and circle where they are on the map to better health. Maybe they're on their second med. Maybe they need a cysto in urodynamics. Show them where they are on the map and where they've got to go to get where they want to be. Put the date of service on this form. What did they score themselves on that intake form at the front desk when they came in? Were they a 4? Were they a 5? Were they a 6? And where do they want to be? You know, when you show somebody where they are and where they can be to get to where they want to be. So let's show them on paper where they are and where they want to be. And then obviously, the first paragraph down at the bottom of the page, we're giving that patient a phone number and we're telling them, hey, you're on a medicine. If you've got side effects or you're no better in 2 to 4 weeks, give us a call back. We're going to switch you to another medicine. Or if you've already had several medicines, we're going to move you on to the next level of diagnostic testing. Or if you've had all of that already, let's move you on to an advanced therapy. So, you know, in the bottom paragraph is a pledge from the healthcare providers to that patient of, this is our pledge to you. You help yourself, you're coming here, and we pledge to help you get to a better place. So I love this tool, and I certainly hope that this helps a lot of you all keep track of your patients.
Excellent point, Beth. You know, as healthcare is moving more and more towards accountability of the individual, this tool is really a great opportunity to put in paper the relationship between the provider and the patient in terms of getting a great patient outcome. So there's another opportunity for partnership in healthcare. So we've been talking about provider to patient, but there's also opportunity for patient to patient partnerships in healthcare. And some of you might know these programs as ambassador programs, but we know of some practices that have engaged prior or current patients to help onboard new patients as they're contemplating entering third therapies. And I would encourage you to find ways that are HIPAA compliant to do that within your office. It usually involves some established patients who are willing to coach others to put their name on a volunteer list and ask your prospective patients if they might be interested in choosing a buddy to talk to. So something else to think about in terms of helping to navigate your patients. All of these different touch points help to get that patient engaged in their health care. And there's one last opportunity for helping you to navigate your patients, and maybe one that we may have forgotten, but as a person who's associated with Laborie, we want to remind you that industry can bring tools and support to you as you're doing your patient navigation programs. So for example, the tools that you'll be getting from this webinar, in addition to all the support you can get from your field territory managers at Laborie, are other sources of help and support to you as you engage in this program. And not to be forgotten is our clinical and medical associations are also helpful. And you probably are aware that the American Urological Association has position papers and guidelines and tools for overactive bladder patients. And these are great opportunities to take advantage of tools that have been invented by others so that you don't have to reinvent the wheel yourself. So with that, I'd like to do now is ask Beth how we can get started. If you've got a navigation program in place and it just needs to be jump-started, or if you've not implemented a Navigator program and you want to do a light program such as this, what is the easiest way to get started? And I'll ask Beth to speak to that as we are now.
Deb, it's like I said earlier, this can be overwhelming. You know, we've heard about navigation programs for years now. It can be overwhelming, but it's really very simple, especially when we handle it this way. And I think it's the best way of doing it. honestly. And I came from a practice where we had tons of navigators. We had a very large office, and we had lots of navigators dedicated to disease states and conditions. And then we also had Lite navigator programs in small office. And we tried to compare the two to see, how we did in both situations. In fact, the answer is anytime you touch a patient and communicate and help them, you're going to have a good outcome. You're going to make that patient happy. When I say outcome, in this sense, I mean a good patient experience so that we can move them through the pathway. And we're going to make it simple by you've got your resources already at your fingertips, and basically they'll be doing their job, plus you're telling them how to touch that patient in navigation, how to navigate that patient through. So it really should not matter whether it's a large office or a small office. Every patient should feel very special because they are getting personalized medicine, very individual, and they're getting the attention they need. So it's not a one-size-fits-all program. We can make this work no matter how heavy or how light you want it. But the Lite program, it's basically you've got a whole swim pool of lanes, and everybody stays in their lane and they do their job, and it will work. I guarantee you it will work. So you've got the patients in your practice already. Get your menu together and serve your patients.
Well, thank you for that, Beth. And another area to get started is to take a look at your patient population, run a list of identifying those that are coded as OAB patients, find out if they have been prescribed drugs and what's going on with their drugs. And if they've failed 2 of these medications, why not reach out to them about cystoscopy and urodynamics? And for those that are new patients presenting in the pathway, educate them early on about the third-line therapies. So these are all things that you have the power to get started on with your existing team. I'd also like to ask Betty to speak to us about the unique opportunities with urodynamicists.
At the practice I worked with for 20 years prior to joining Laborie, we began to look at the data of the OAB prescriptions versus third-line therapies and realized that our patients were not moving forward in their care. So these facts demanded action, which created the platform for the OAB pathway. So the venture to establish this program created a need for more UDS clinics. So at the time, we only had 1 clinic, as most physicians were performing their UDS in the ASC. So I focused on recruiting staff within the practice, not hiring outside the practice, but reutilizing what we already have. Asked them who was interested in training to perform urodynamics. So there were several interested because it was an opportunity for advancement in their career and a chance for them to be involved in a program that would impact patients in a positive way. So they were sent to educational courses provided by Laborie, as well as hands-on training with me until they were able to perform urodynamics independently with confidence. And it's also important that physicians be confident in the UDS staff as well. They need to be able to look at the UDS tracings and the documentation and easily facilitate interpretation. This is a necessity. So the team was also educated in bladder function and bladder conditions that would warrant urodynamics needed for the patient. So the UDS team was and is an excellent support for the OAB program.
That is a great tip and an insight. And as you've also suggested, it's a really great way to enrich your staff by offering them more opportunities to advance, but also, as you said, to greater impact of patient care. So we want to also make a pledge to you that as the sponsor of this webinar, but also as stakeholders in the urology and urogynecology industry, you can count on Laborie to help you in your locations with our field managers and our clinical managers. So if this is something that can be of import or help to you, this is the contact information for Laborie. So what I'd like to do now is just ask Beth to close with us on a few thoughts about what we've learned today and what we can do with this education going forward.
Thank you, Debbie. Everybody, it's a new normal. It's a new mindset. If anybody comes to you and asks you, do you have a Navigator program? Yes, I do. How many Navigators do you have? Well, how many people work in your enterprise? You've got 50 Navigators. You have a Navigator program, and you are working hard to get these patients through your menu. So I know I speak for Labrie, for Deb, for Betty, for myself for sure, and all of you on this webinar today. We're ready to offer our OAB patients a better quality of life. We all want to ride off into the sunset. Let me emphasize to you again, the power of just one person, one word, one touch can be priceless when it comes to your patient experience. And you all have the power to better serve a multitude of already existing underserved patients. So I go back to the message from our opening video. Let's take this patient from imagine to hope to believe and imagine no more. Thanks for your time.
Well, thank you for that, Beth. And what I'd like to do now is to ask you as an audience where you're at. And I'm wondering if we can ask you for a quick insight on what next we can do to help you. So we have another one of these polls, and we've thought of some things that might be helpful to you that we can offer next. And love your feedback on what would be useful for you as next steps in your setting up a Lite patient navigation program. And again, I'll call upon my colleague Carol to bring up this poll and let us know what the results are. We'll give you a minute to read through these options, and please feel free to check away. And as I know that most of you are just checking boxes now, we'll ask Carol to summarize some of the top requests.
Okay, top answers, 62% at tools and tips for engaging patients, as well as 21% patient webinar explaining OAB therapies.
Excellent. And I know, Carol, that you'll grab a snapshot of that as well, because we're going to definitely use this as food for thought in terms of what we can next deliver to you. But what I'd like to do now is move into Q&A and get to some of the questions that you've been thinking of while we've been working on the webinar here today. So again, I'll share with you the contact information for our speakers, and I'll looking here and seeing our first question. First question has to do with how might we find some underutilized resources within the enterprise to ask them to take on a bigger role in navigation. I'm going to ask Betty to address that. And I'm wondering if Betty has to unmute herself.
Oh, sorry about that.
We all do it.
Go back to what I was just discussing about the urodynamics department. So, as I mentioned earlier, using the urodynamics department is a great way to get started. If you're not, sure how or who to use, start there, because the MAs and the nurses that are performing urodynamics, they're already in a position for communicating with OAB patients. Because patients in most cases, before moving on to a third-line therapy, are scheduled for urodynamics. So the nurse or the MA has opportunity at that time to answer questions and educate the patient about third-line therapies then. So Labrie offers resources to facilitate this plan. So like I said, it's a great place to start. If you don't know where else to start, it's a great foundation.
Thank you. That's a great suggestion. And I'm wondering if, Beth, you might have anything to add or any other thoughts on where to find underutilized resources?
Well, it's kind of like, I guess I want to say everybody's role is equally important, from those decision makers to the nurses, to the front desk, to the schedulers, to the call centers, all of those high-touch village that we discussed. Everybody's role is equally important. And as a business, we have to keep the lights on. As providers, we want to be warm and fluffy and compassionate to our patients and make them well. So we all have the same goal, but you know what? Sometimes, no matter what role you have to roll your sleeves up and say, today this is what I'm doing. We have a job to do, and It doesn't matter if I'm asked to do this today or this today. It's all about my patient. Being a patient advocate, as Betty mentioned earlier, is what we truly all are, and we treat other people like we want to be treated. All of this, is going to, you're going to get a bottom line that's going to be better, and you're going to have happier patients, and they're going to tell people, and they're going to tell people, and they're going to tell people, and you know what? It's just a good thing. So I just encourage everybody to get to drink the Kool-Aid and to have the passion of taking care of these patients. We've got a battle that we're fighting, and we can make a big difference.
Mhm.
Indeed. Well, with that, I would like to remind you that you'll be getting a copy of this deck. There's also references at the end of this deck, and also invite you, if you'd like to reach out to us offline, that we can make ourselves available to you. And we're hoping as next steps, you'll get a questionnaire from Lobbery to ask you for feedback on our performance today. And in the spirit of continuous improvement, we'd love to hear your comments and suggestions. And we thank you for giving us direction on what tools are next helpful to you. So you've given us some really good food for thought. So with that, I'd like to thank you for your attention. I'd like to thank our esteemed faculty members for sharing their real-world experience in making this happen in their own enterprises. And I'd like to thank Lobbery for making this all possible. So with that, I'll sign off and say bye for now, and looking forward to speaking with you all again in a future webinar. Take care now.
Bye.